Imagine this, a young president sits across the table from three powerful envoys. The air is heavy, the conversation sharp. Release $350 million worth of gold reserves, they say, or your nation will face sanctions that no friend can protect you from. Behind the request stood the weight of the International Monetary Fund, and whispers carried the name of Donald Trump himself, a figure whose influence stretched far beyond the Oval Office, into business, politics, and global finance. The room fell silent. Every eye was fixed on Ibrahim Traoré, the 36-year-old leader of Burkina Faso. Would he bow, as so many had before him? His response was calm but unyielding. "This gold belongs to Burkina Faso's people," he said. "It will not be given away." That refusal was not just an answer. It was a spark in a forest of dry leaves. Before we go deeper, pause for a moment. Stories like this are rarely told from Africa's perspective. If you believe Africa's story deserves to be heard, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you are watching from. Your voice matters in this conversation. Who exactly is this man who dares to say no at such a young age? Ibrahim Traoré is the youngest head of state in the world, a soldier-turned-president who stepped into power when his country was struggling under waves of insecurity and economic pressure. Burkina Faso, a nation often called the land of upright people, is rich with gold, yet many of its citizens live in poverty. For decades, international loans, repayment plans, and agreements signed under pressure left the country walking a fine line between survival and dependency. It was this history that gave Traoré a simple no its thunder. The refusal wasn't about a single pile of gold. It was about sovereignty, dignity, and the future of a nation. But the weight of history is heavy. Leaders in Africa who resisted too strongly often faced isolation, coups, or worse. Everyone in that room understood the risk of defiance. And so, as Traoré's words echoed out, a rumor began to stir in Ouagadougou. People whispered that the gold might not stay safe. Some believed it could vanish overnight, not by force, but by shadowy deals or betrayal from within. The gold was still in Burkina Faso's hands, but the question hanging over the nation was chilling. For how long? To understand the moment, we must look back. Years earlier, inside a government office, another Burkina leader signed an agreement with foreign institutions. The document was thick, written in languages many of his own people could not read. Advisors around him nodded, urging him forward. With a single pen stroke, rights to resources were traded, loans were accepted, and obligations were sealed. It was not betrayal, at least not in his eyes. It was survival in a world where smaller nations often had little choice. But the cost was deep, and it fell hardest on the people. Outside those offices, in the dust of rural villages, men and women bent over the earth, mining gold with bare hands. Children carried water, women sifted ore in bowls. The land was rich, but the wealth flew across oceans. New roads were promised but never built. Schools stayed underfunded, hospitals short of medicine. The people saw gold leave their soil but rarely felt it in their lives. It was in these times that a young Ibrahim Traoré grew into manhood. As a soldier, he watched quietly. He observed foreign delegations arriving, meetings behind closed doors, and the quiet acceptance of deals that gave away more than they returned. He spoke little, but inside he was taking notes. Each decision he saw added to an unspoken vow, that if the chance ever came, he would not bend so easily. To many of his peers, he was just another officer. To history, he was still invisible. But deep inside, the idea of a different path was forming. Years later, that idea would collide with reality. When the ultimatum came, when powerful voices demanded Burkina Faso's gold, his answer was not born in that room. It had been born long ago, in the quiet observation of leaders signing away the nation's lifeblood. He had promised himself he would never be that man. And that promise would soon change the course of his nation. But promises alone are fragile. In the silence of power, betrayal often waits. And even before Traoré rose to lead, shadows were already gathering. The streets of Ouagadougou erupted with noise. Soldiers in armored vehicles moved through the city. People cheered, flags waved, and chants filled the air. A coup was unfolding, and at its heart was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. This was not just a seizure of power, it was a release of long-held frustration. Citizens had lived under years of insecurity, broken promises, and economic strain. Now they poured into the streets, not in fear, but in celebration. Justice, they cried. Sovereignty. When Traoré first addressed the nation, his words carried no polish. He was not a career politician. His voice was that of a soldier, direct and steady. He told the youth that the country belonged to them. He spoke of dignity, of walking a path together, of standing tall. To many, he sounded like Thomas Sankara reborn, the revolutionary who once inspired the nation with dreams of self-reliance. To others, he was simply a symbol, proof that the young could lead, that courage still lived in the land of upright people. But outside Burkina Faso, the tone was different. Foreign headlines soon carried sharp warnings. Burkina Faso's new leader, a threat to stability. Analysts debated on television screens. Was he a reformer, or a risk? Some predicted foreign influence would grow stronger. Others suggested the country was marching toward isolation. The world was watching, and the story was being told in many voices, some hopeful, some fearful. Inside the country, hope burned brightly. For once, the people felt their leader stood with them, not above them. But whispers carried a different truth. Enemies had been made, and not just within Africa. Far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, powerful interests were already preparing their response. The streets sang with celebration, but the horizon was clouded with questions. Would this young leader stand tall against the storm that was coming? Or would the weight of history press him down, as it had so many before him? The answer was still uncertain. But one thing was clear, the battle for Burkina Faso's sovereignty had only just begun. The news came quietly, almost like a rumor. But the claim was too bold to ignore. A former US President, Donald Trump, was eyeing Africa's gold, not as treasure, but as leverage in a larger game of power. For many, it was shocking. Could one of the most influential figures in recent American history be linked to Burkina Faso's reserves? The whispers suggested that gold worth $350 million had become the bargaining chip, a silent tool in negotiations that went beyond borders. Before we go deeper, pause for a moment. If you believe Africa's hidden battles deserve to be told, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Your voice shapes how far this story travels. To understand why such claims could gain traction, we must look at America's long-standing interest in Africa. For decades, African resources, from oil in Nigeria to cobalt in the Congo, have drawn the attention of world powers. Gold is no different. It is not just a metal for jewelry. It underpins currencies, strengthens reserves, and, in times of crisis, becomes the ultimate store of value. The United States, with its global reach, has always kept a close eye on where these resources flow. Presidents, corporations, and financial institutions have each, in their own way, sought influence over Africa's wealth. And then, there is the IMF. The International Monetary Fund was created to stabilize economies, to provide loans when nations stumble. But history shows another side. Many African countries, including Burkina Faso, took IMF loans that came with strict conditions, cuts in public spending, market liberalization, and structural reforms. Some called it necessary discipline. Others called it a debt trap, a cycle where countries repaid more than they borrowed, yet never fully broke free. It is in this context that rumors of Trump's involvement touched a nerve. To many Africans, it felt less like fantasy and more like a continuation of a long story, powerful outsiders circling Africa's resources in moments of weakness. And then came the twist. A leaked memo surfaced in financial circles. It hinted at discussions not of cooperation, but of control. In bold letters, one phrase stood out: freeze Burkina Faso's reserves until compliance is secured. Was it real? Was it planted? No one knew for sure. But the mere existence of such words sent a shiver through the nation. What if the gold was never stolen, never smuggled, but simply locked away in vaults abroad, untouchable until conditions were met? The fear was not of soldiers at the gates, but of signatures on papers that could strip a nation of its sovereignty without firing a single shot. And so, as Traore stood firm, another question lingered. If the world's strongest institutions decided to act, how much power did Burkina Faso really have? In the corridors of government, loyalty is often tested. And one evening, under dim light, a meeting was held that few knew about. A senior minister, respected in public, sat quietly with two foreign envoys. No cameras, no press, no applause, just whispered conversations and exchanged notes. The envoy spoke plainly: work with us, and Burkina Faso will not suffer. Stand against us, and isolation will follow. The minister listened, nodding slowly. His heart was heavy. He did not see betrayal. He saw survival. In his mind, the math was simple. Burkina Faso was young, fragile, and surrounded by challenges. Could pride feed the children? Could sovereignty fill the hospitals? He remembered the villages where schools had no books, where families lived one meal at a time. To him, bending slightly seemed better than breaking completely. And so, he began to draft a private letter of reassurance, promising cooperation, not because he hated his country, but because he feared for it. But secrets are heavy things. They rarely stay hidden for long. In the military barracks, whispers began to spread. Documents were leaked, voices recorded, details shared. When Ibrahim Traoré heard the report, his expression did not change. He did not shout. He did not curse. He simply asked, "Are there traitors in my own house?" The words hung in the air like smoke. The minister believed he had acted for survival. But to others, it looked like surrender. And in a country fighting to redefine itself, even small cracks in loyalty could widen into dangerous fault lines. Now the nation faced another question. Was the true battle against outside pressure, or against division within its own walls? The answer would soon matter more than ever. The anger began in whispers, then shouts, then waves of people filling the streets of Ouagadougou. Banners were lifted high. Drums pounded. Chants rolled like thunder, "Our gold is ours. IMF, leave us alone." Young men marched, women clapped, elders raised their fists. It was not just protest, it was a cry of identity. For decades, the people had watched resources flow outward while poverty remained at home. Now, they demanded change, and they demanded it loudly. In the neighborhoods, mothers gathered their children and explained what the chants meant. "This is about more than gold," one woman said. "It is about whether we decide our future, or others do it for us." Children listened, eyes wide, as their mothers described a history of dependence, of leaders forced to bow. They explained why dignity mattered as much as food, why sovereignty mattered as much as aid. It was education not from textbooks, but from the lips of those who had lived the struggle. The government watched carefully. Demonstrations could unite, but they could also spiral out of control. Traoré remained steady, urging calm while affirming sovereignty. His challenge was delicate, to channel the people's fire without letting it burn the fragile order of the state. Then came the whispers. Strange vehicles seen at night near the border. Foreign men moving in shadows, speaking languages unfamiliar. Some called them traders. Others said mercenaries. The rumors spread quickly. Were outside forces preparing to step in, not with loans or sanctions, but with boots on the ground? No one knew for sure. But the possibility was enough to deepen the tension. The protests grew louder. The stakes grew higher. And the question became darker. Was Burkina Faso's fight about to move from boardrooms and streets to the battlefield? It was a secret that even many inside the government didn't know. Beneath the soil of Burkina Faso, in a secured reserve hidden from the eyes of the world, lay $350 million worth of gold. Not in foreign banks. Not on ships bound for other nations. But inside the country itself. For a nation long drained by external contracts and obligations, the discovery was shocking. To some, it felt like a miracle. To others, it felt like a dangerous gamble. When Traoré revealed the truth to his closest circle, the room fell silent. "This gold," he explained softly, "is not just metal. It is our dignity. I kept it here because I did not want another nation to decide our future. For too long, our treasures have built cities we will never see. This time, it stays with us." Some nodded, their eyes full of pride. Others hesitated, worried about what it meant to defy the world's most powerful institutions. Traoré continued, reminding them of history. How leaders before him had trusted outside banks, only to see reserves frozen. How promises of partnership had turned into decades of repayment. He was determined not to repeat that cycle. But secrets rarely remain buried. Somewhere between whispers in the capital and murmurs in foreign offices, the news began to leak. A quiet message slipped out. Burkina Faso was sitting on gold, and it had refused to release it. The secret was no longer a shield. It had become a target. What was once hidden now stood exposed, and the nation braced for the storm that would follow. If you were in Traoré's place, what would you do? Do you think he is right to hide the gold for his people? Comment below, your opinion matters. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, so we can keep bringing you these untold stories of Africa. The meeting was brief but unforgettable. IMF envoys arrived with folders in hand, their tone calm but firm. They asked for access to the gold vault. They spoke of obligations, of trust, of international agreements. The implication was clear. Burkina Faso's reserves were not just Burkina Faso's concern, they were tied to the global system. But Traoré did not flinch. He listened carefully, then leaned forward with a steady voice. Burkina Faso is not a colony. We will honor fairness, but we will not hand over our soul. This gold is the labor of our people. It will not leave without their consent. The room grew tense. One envoy tried to soften the message, speaking of cooperation. But another's words cut deeper. If you refuse, he warned, sanctions will follow. Your people will feel hunger. Your economy will suffer. You may keep your gold, but at what cost? The silence after that threat was louder than the words themselves. For Traore, it was a choice between dignity and survival. For the envoys, it was a negotiation. For the people of Burkina Faso, it would become a question of how much sacrifice sovereignty was worth. The doors closed. The meeting ended. But the air outside felt heavier than before. Now the world waited to see, would Traore bend under pressure, or would he risk everything to hold his ground? The heartbreak came not from abroad, but from within. One morning, reports reached Traore that a trusted ally, someone who had walked beside him during the coup, someone who had sworn loyalty to the cause, had been caught plotting. The plan was simple but devastating, to hand over the secret codes to the vault in exchange for promises of protection abroad. For Traore, it was more than betrayal. It was personal. He sat quietly, reflecting on what this meant. Leadership was not just about courage in front of enemies. It was about the loneliness of trust, the pain of watching loyalty turn into doubt. He thought of his youth, of the soldiers who had cheered him into power, of the millions of citizens who now pinned their hopes on him. And now, even among his inner circle, cracks had begun to form. He did not lash out. Instead, he carried the weight inward, asking himself the hardest question. Was he expecting too much of people in a time of such immense pressure? After all, survival meant different things to different people. To him, sovereignty was survival. To others, safety for their families mattered more than pride. Still, the betrayal could not be ignored. He prepared himself for the next step, not in secret, but in public. If loyalty was to be tested, it would be tested in the open. And so, with calm resolve, Traore planned his confrontation. Before the entire government, before the people, the truth would have to be faced. But how would the nation respond when the mask of unity was lifted? Would it stand stronger together, or splinter under the weight of distrust? The answer would decide not just the gold, but the very soul of Burkina Faso. The city of Ouagadougou trembled with voices. From rooftops to dusty streets, tens of thousands gathered, their eyes fixed on one man standing tall at the podium. Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in military uniform, raised his fist high. His voice cut through the hot air. Burkina Faso is free. Our gold is ours. Our future will not be written in foreign capitals. From this day forward, no power decides for us, only our people do. The crowd erupted. Flags waved. Drums thundered. To many, it was not just a speech. It was a declaration of independence all over again, not from colonial borders, but from invisible chains of finance and control. In the middle of the storm of voices, something softer happened. Traore stepped down from the podium for a moment, and a young boy was lifted onto the stage by his mother. The child's eyes were wide, his small hands gripping the edge of Traore's jacket. Traore bent down, placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, and said quietly, "You are the reason we fight. Africa's future belongs to you. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." The boy nodded. Around them, the crowd softened for a brief second, their cheers turning into tears. It was a moment of calm in the middle of defiance, a reminder that sovereignty was not only about gold or politics, but about the generations yet to come. Then came the news. Phones buzzed. Radio stations interrupted broadcasts. ECOWAS leaders were meeting in secret. Their agenda, Burkina Faso. Reports hinted at discussions of harsh sanctions, cutting the country off from trade, finance, and even regional partnerships. Some whispered of something worse. The celebration in Ouagadougou did not end, but the air grew tense. What would isolation mean for a country already standing on the edge? The plot twist was clear. As Traore declared freedom, powerful neighbors were plotting their response. Behind closed doors, in a grand hall filled with Africa's most powerful leaders, the debate was heated. Some ECOWAS heads of state argued fiercely that Burkina Faso's defiance could not be tolerated. If one small nation broke ranks, others might follow. The unity of the region, they said, depended on discipline. Sanctions were proposed, economic, political, and diplomatic. Some voices even went further. If they do not comply, one leader warned, we must consider military intervention. The words shocked the room. To threaten force against a fellow African nation stirred old wounds, memories of divisions used by outsiders for centuries. And then, a lone voice rose. One leader, standing apart from the rest, spoke with calm conviction. Brothers, have we forgotten? Africa cannot rise if we spend our strength punishing our own. Let us guide them, yes. Let us disagree, yes. But do not let us become the chains our people are already trying to break. The room fell silent for a moment. Some nodded. Others frowned. But the words hung heavy, a reminder of the deeper question. Was ECOWAS protecting Africa's unity, or protecting outside interests? But while the leaders debated, the outside world was already watching. A leak emerged. Secret recordings of the closed-door conversations were somehow released to the public. Clips spread on social media, faster than fire in dry grass. Voices of leaders calling for sanctions. Others hinting at intervention. Citizens across the region listened with shock, anger, and fear. Burkina Faso erupted online and in the streets, convinced that the battle for their gold had now become a battle for their survival. The world was listening, and the pressure was rising. If you believe Africa should stand united, share this video with your friends. Let's spark the conversation together. The anger spilled onto the streets. In Ouagadougou, crowds set fire to billboards carrying foreign brands. Posters seen as symbols of control were torn down. Some protesters stormed empty offices once used by international organizations, chanting words of revenge. No more. Africa is free. The flames lit up the night sky, their smoke a message to the world. Burkina Faso was no longer bowing. Yet, not everyone cheered. In quiet corners, village elders gathered the youth and spoke with wisdom. My sons, my daughters, one elder said, anger can destroy as easily as it can liberate. Fire can warm your home, but it can also burn it down. Sovereignty is not built with rage alone. It needs discipline. It needs vision. The youth listened, torn between fury and patience. For them, the struggle was real. Hunger was still in their homes. Jobs were still scarce. But the elders' reminder added a pause: the revolution could not become chaos. Then, suddenly, chaos came anyway. Late one evening, gunfire echoed near the presidential convoy. Panic spread through the capital. Rumors flew faster than bullets: an assassination attempt on Traore. No one knew for certain who was behind it. Some said foreign hands. Others whispered of internal rivals. The truth was blurred in fear and confusion. But one fact was undeniable: the leader who had declared Burkina Faso sovereignty was now a marked man. The city froze in shock. The people asked themselves, if their defender fell, what would happen to the dream of freedom? The plot twist was no longer about sanctions or gold. It was about survival itself. The gunfire still echoed in the hearts of the people. In Ouagadougou, word spread fast: Ibrahim Traoré had survived. His convoy was riddled with bullet holes, but the leader himself emerged alive. The city breathed again. Supporters flooded the streets, some weeping, others singing. It was not just relief. It was defiance. For many, the failed attack proved that their struggle had reached the highest stakes. But instead of hiding, Traoré chose a different path. He went to the military hospital that night. Rooms filled with men and women wounded in the chaos. Some were guards who had shielded him. Others were bystanders caught in the crossfire. Traoré walked from bed to bed, speaking quietly, shaking hands, resting his palm on foreheads. His words were not fiery here. They were soft. You did not suffer for me, he told them. You suffered for our future. And I will not forget. Nurses paused. Families wiped tears. For a moment, the leader was not a commander, not a symbol, but a man carrying the weight of those who had bled beside him. Yet behind this calm, darker truths were surfacing. Whispers in the intelligence community pointed to something far more unsettling than internal rivalry. Documents, intercepted communications, and sudden money transfers suggested a plot that reached beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Analysts traced funds through shadowy channels, linking them to foreign actors with clear interests in gold, stability, and influence. It was no longer just a question of domestic power. The struggle had spilled into the hidden hands of international politics. And with that revelation, the danger grew heavier. The attempt on Traoré's life did not silence the people. Instead, it spread fire across the continent. In Bamako, young Malians marched with banners that read, Burkina Faso, we are with you. In Niamey, crowds chanted Traoré's name as if he were their own. Even in cities like Accra, Lagos, and Abuja, students filled university gates, waving flags and shouting that Africa's wealth must never be stolen again. The youth had found a symbol. They were not only protesting for Burkina Faso. They were protesting for themselves. And then came something unexpected. Letters. Hundreds of them. Mothers across Africa, from Dakar to Kano to Kumasi, wrote messages addressed to Traore. Some reached him directly, others circulated on social media. "My son," one letter read, "your fight is our fight. We call you son of Africa. Stand tall, but remember, a mother's blessing is stronger than any bullet." Another wrote, "We lost fathers to mines. We lost brothers to poverty. May you not be lost to betrayal. Protect yourself, protect our hope." Traore reportedly read them late at night, the words filling him with both strength and weight. The continent was watching, and leaning on him. But just as the solidarity swelled, the pushback came. From across the Atlantic, a statement shook the headlines. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, outspoken and controversial as ever, declared that Burkina Faso must honor its obligations regarding gold and contracts. The remark spread instantly. Some took it as confirmation of foreign pressure. Others saw it as a warning. What it made clear was this: the battle over gold had now become global, with powerful voices directly naming Burkina Faso. And the stakes for Traore had never been higher. The morning sun rose over Ouagadougou, and with it came the boldest announcement yet. Standing before a crowd, Traore declared, "Our gold will never leave these lands without serving our people first. From this day forward, Burkina Faso's wealth belongs to Burkina hands." The words thundered across Africa, carried by radio, by satellite TV, by endless streams online. To some, it was liberation. To others, a provocation. But no one could ignore it. Later, in a quieter setting, the same man who roared to the masses was found kneeling. In a circle with village elders, Traore bowed his head. Their palms rested on his shoulders as they prayed for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to carry a burden heavier than any uniform. It was not strategy. It was humility. A reminder that beyond politics and power, the road to sovereignty would require guidance deeper than ambition. And then, the ripple spread. Miners who once labored for scraps began demanding fair wages. Farmers saw new hope that wealth might finally reach the soil. Students debated in classrooms whether the moment marked the start of a second independence. But also, fear lingered. International pressure was mounting. Foreign capitals debated sanctions, contracts, and interventions. Allies whispered advice in the shadows. The future was uncertain. Still, something irreversible had begun. In marketplaces, women repeated the phrase, "If Burkina Faso can rise, why not Africa?" In music studios, rappers and poets laced their verses with words of freedom. And across borders, ordinary people began to wonder, if one small nation could challenge centuries of control, perhaps the rest could too. Yet the man at the center of it all remained a target. Attempts had already been made on his life. Rumors swirled of more to come. The storm was only growing. But the gold was safe, the people were standing, and a new imagination had been born. The final question was no longer whether Africa could rise, but whether Traore himself could survive long enough to see it. And that, perhaps, is the story still being written. If you don't want to miss the next chapter of Africa's fight for dignity and freedom, subscribe now. Share this story. And join us as we follow the storm that has only just begun.